Alright, we've been drinking liberal tears for close to 2 weeks now, and I'm the first to admit it feels really good, and this thing is bloody addictive. I probably gained at least 3 kilograms in weight from all those salty liberal tears, because they're so good and tasty. And that's perfectly fine. But now, more than ever, it is time to double down on the left, both culturally and in terms of practical politics, and we should do this particularly here in Europe, where they were completely unprepared for this. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. Alright, so let's see if I can get this across in as few minutes as possible. It's kinda hard for a practical politics video, but sure, I will give it a shot. So, the left is clearly wounded on both sides of the Atlantic. The left in the States is throwing a massive temper tantrum, particularly in universities. Come on. Cornell hosted a cry-in for students. That's where Dr. Thomas Sowell used to teach, for crying out loud. Also, the University of Michigan Law School has built the ultimate safe space with Legos and coloring sheets and positive card making. I'm not joking. This is the place that should nurture the next luminary scholars in law. God bless the United States. With such future elites, you'll need religion more than ever, and not because religion is true, but because you will need something to keep the upcoming insanity in check. Meanwhile, the actual ideologues, the Democrat strategists, show that they were indeed prepared for this, as more and more evidence emerges that they had employment ads for professional protesters even before the election, thus suspecting that they might lose, or at the very least suspecting that a little rioting and protests will still be needed, either to humiliate Trump supporters if they had won, or to agitate and disrupt if they had lost. And it kinda does make sense from a practical politics standpoint. That's what I would have done if I had been in their place. What amazes me is that the right is still not playing this game. GOP strategists should have massive pro-Trump rallies right about, now. But they don't, because the right still thinks it's a good idea to play fair against an opposition that never, ever, under any circumstances, plays fair. Heck, they don't even play fair amongst themselves, and see the DNC primary for further evidence in that regard. But aside from the temper tantrums, we need to get back on the culture wars, more so now than probably ever before, at least in the last 2 years. And why? Because the left in Europe is completely baffled. They have no idea what to do because they were not prepared for this. And we do have an edge. If we double down now, before they start recovering, we can gain more ground with the culture much faster, and much more ground per se than we could have gained under normal conditions. Now, I have seen some calls on the right to unity and calm under the reasoning that this was a big enough shock, and now we can rest a bit and let the shockwave propagate itself throughout the Western world. No, no, no. And it's no for everyone, not just Europe. Sure, it kinda does make sense, such a call in the United States, because the place, still needs to be governed and the swamp won't drain itself. I get that. But then look again what you are actually demanding. The left is still incapable, even today, to even acknowledge our very humanity, let alone acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, there might possibly be some legitimate issues and arguments on the side that voted for the orange reality TV star. Maybe? No, of course not. To the left, anyone who rooted for Trump is a subhuman scum, and those who voted for Trump are criminals. Seriously, this is Huffington Post saying that voting for Trump was a hate crime. You want unity with these people? Really? In what universe you think that is even remotely a possibility? Also, Huffington Post, in a spectacular act of misogyny, which is endemic in leftist feminism, blames white women for the fact that the special snowflakes at Huffington Post have bad feelings these days. This is the opposition. And it is in pain. It got a huge kick in the teeth that it didn't see coming. And that is why we should double down. Alright. So, as I said, I want to focus more on Europe. We have to milk this cultural shift and momentum to shake things up on this old continent as well. Now, the approach will have to differ from country to country, so I will take a few examples and explain in practicalities. Let's start with Austria, because Austria has a rerun of its presidential elections just next month. So, Austrian and German speakers, here's what you could do. First of all, pressure Hofer to get himself a meeting with Trump. I mean, it's not easy, but it is doable. Also, shill inside the Hofer campaign for him to take an even more populist stance. Secondly, any non-leftist who speaks German within the reach of my voice should consider infiltrating neutral boards on social media and shill for Hofer, linking him to the Trump and Brexit phenomenon, and do so in a manner that portrays the sweeping trend as inevitable. Again, this is basic agitprop that the left has been doing to us for ages. In the case of Hofer, one argument could sound something like this. Look, Hofer is clearly from the Trump and Brexit phenomenon. Now we, that is Austrians, don't have to go full Brexit, but surely more border controls, more sensible welfare laws, and less political correctness is in order, as most of the civilized world is finally waking up. Besides, since when did we, that is the Austrians, embraced so much of this anyway? We're the people that gave misses to the world. Or something to that effect. The reason I suggest phrasing it in that way is because you want to appeal to the moderates and suggest that maybe, just maybe, a bit of national pride is quite in order, lest you become cucked. Alright, next example, France. Now, France has a very difficult mission. The situation is immensely complicated. The country has been the target of numerous bloody terrorist attacks and also the target of numerous social engineering policies of the current socialist administration. Now, most likely, the presidential final will be between Marine Le Pen and Sarkozy, but hopefully it won't. Now, I did express in the past my concerns with Front National, namely that its economic policies are an absolute disaster and, of course, the issue of Kremlin funding. So there's that. But there's also good news. We're still in the primary season, and the mainstream right wing, that would be the Republican Party or Les Républicains, has a very interesting race going on. There are basically three candidates: Sarkozy, of course, Alain Juppé, an absolute cuck, and Francois Fillon, who has been gaining momentum in the last couple of weeks, with the polls showing him as a likely victor in the primary contest, or at the very least going into the second round of the primary contest with the Republicans. Now, the primaries on the Republican Party are basically the only ones that really matter at this point. The Socialist Party is fragmented and in shambles, and for bloody good reason. The socialist administration has been an unmitigated disaster on the country, to the point of leading France to the textbook definition of a failed state. Now, I will make the apparently weird suggestion to French conservatives watching this channel, of which I know there are quite a few, to attempt to support Francois Fillon. Now, Fillon has a firm grasp of economics, something which cannot be said about Alain Juppé, who is to the left of Sarkozy, or of course about Sarkozy himself. Now, in addition to that, his stance on immigration is pretty straightforward and has been for at least 3 years now. Basically, his stance is that there are too many immigrants in the country and that the Republic simply cannot cope with everyone. And he has been saying this for many years. He was saying this in 2013. And in 2013, the mass influx of further diversity, progress, and cultural enrichment hadn't happened yet. Also, nor did the Bataclan or the Nice cultural enrichment had happened either. Now, if you can get Fillon into the second round of the Republican Party, he can and will beat Juppé for sure. Juppé comes off as a low-energy Brussels bureaucrat, and that's a problem for him. What Fillon will have to do is to simply call him a low-energy Brussels bureaucrat and run with that in the primaries. But for now, he needs to fight Sarkozy, and any help would be appreciated. Now, the general consensus is to keep Marine Le Pen away from presidency. Now, that's fine and dandy, but at the same time, any French-speaking individual watching this should also want, well, a non-cucked president, which Sarkozy and Juppé would absolutely not be one. Besides, Sarkozy isn't really that popular anyway, so he would win solely because he's not Marine Le Pen, and that in itself would be dangerous because just keeping Le Pen away through these kinds of dubious tactics and coalitions will not solve the very real grievances that Le Pen's voters actually have. By pushing Sarkozy or Juppé in the front row, this would mean engaging in well, how should I say this? Engaging in Clintonian tactics, if I may use this expression. The Republicans must try their best to court the populist vote of Marine Le Pen, and it's not really that hard to do so. By running Francois Fillon on the top of the ticket, most of the moderates now backing Front National grudgingly would flip to Fillon for sure. Basically, what I'm saying is that the Republicans shouldn't fall in the same trap that Hillary Clinton fell, namely to take voters for granted or consider Le Pen voters as deplorables. Most people supporting Front National aren't racists or xenophobes. They're people legitimately concerned with the staggering levels of immigration that France is forced to bear, and they support Front National because it's the only party with a candidate that is willing to put that issue into words on the campaign trail. Francois Fillon could take quite a lot from that appeal by running on Thatcherite economics, his experience as Prime Minister, and his sensible stance on immigration. He would have a tremendous amount of advantage over both Marine Le Pen and whomever the lefties will nominate. So yeah, if you're French or only French speaking, do try to infiltrate into the boards discussing the Republican primaries and, well, shill for Francois Fillon. Now, make the Republicans great again by pushing a younger candidate with a much more firm grasp of reality rather than establishmentarian old farts who would get elected because of the Front National boogeyman. What I'm saying here is not and should not be controversial at all. I am saying win over the Front National voters by winning the political argument. And that cannot happen if nobody even dares to make the political argument that some of the issues brought up by Front National are actually legitimate and indeed should be on the mainstream political agenda. Alright, another example, Germany. Oh boy. This one's complicated. Basically, there is 10 to 11 months till the next elections. Now, that's plenty of time to build a narrative, stick to it, and shill it everywhere. However, it is too late to build another party, so a party from those existent ones would have to suffice. Now, the immediate choice would seem to be Alternative für Deutschland, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, because it's a pro-capitalist party as opposed to CDU, which drifted immensely from its previously reasonable stance on economics, and because it has a much more reasonable stance on immigration than basically all other parties. On the other hand, AfD's Putinist leanings are a red flag, though the issue has been toned down in recent months, which is good. However, for the purpose of this political project, German and German-speaking individuals listening to this should consider both the shilling for AfD and an attempt to subvert other parties, such as the FPD. Now, the FPD is sort of the Libertarian Party-ish of Germany. Sort of. Now, they've been part of the government before, and they are likely to be again in the future government. On FPD, activists should try to subvert them on the issue of immigration and cultural issues. They're already fine on economics. Recently, they picked up, sadly, some PC/feminist themes, so that shit needs to be purged from the party, as in ASAP. Now, my favorites for sure in Germany are the Alliance for Progress and Renewal, formerly known as Alpha, but now they've changed their name because Alpha was claimed both by a company and a pro-life group. Anyway, it's the party that formed after the splintering from AfD occurred. Now, these guys are also worth shilling for. On immigration, they advocate a system similar to the one Canada has, which is essentially a points-based system, a very reasonable and mainstream policy alternative to the mess that is currently being implemented. On economics, they're probably the best option in the sense that their views are more in line with the German mainstream and are sufficient enough to please most right-wingers. And of course, they are to the right of CDU, although admittedly, that's getting an increasingly easy task as the CDU morphs even further into an authoritarian leftist technocratic bunch. Anyway, the point is that for the German political project, the forces of the populist right shouldn't put all of their eggs into one basket, especially now, so early in the election cycle. So, non-leftists in Germany watching this should pick one of these three parties, the AfD, Alpha, or FDP, and try to subvert their message to be more in line with, well, our ideas. And you can, and indeed should, frame it in terms of electoral success. Now, a majority of Germans support more restrictions on immigration. A plurality of Germans support a harsher approach towards crime committed by immigrants. So there are votes to be won for the parties that dare to break the PC consensus and speak plainly about these issues. Also, strictly for Germany, don't be shy to use scaremongering, which is actually true. If I spoke German, I would speak to AfD or to Alpha or to FDP, something like this. I mean, look guys, if you don't tackle these issues now, the actual Nazis, that would be the NDP, will do it. So let's approach these issues calmly and reasonably to prevent an actual outpouring of actual extremism to emerge. Now, I say this because this tactic works in Germany flawlessly, and in this particular case, it's a tactic that doesn't require you to lie. It is absolutely true that if rising populist parties don't become true to their mission, the actual Nazis could rise in the polls. And for bonus points, I would use a conservative Jew to make the case in terms like this. Like something like this. Look, I don't want the Nazis rising, but I also don't want to be a victim of Islamic violence like the Jews in Malmö, Sweden are. So let's approach this in a level-headed way, and then that said conservative Jew proceeds to make our case. And I mean that as serious as you can get. If you can get one of these parties to get a conservative Jew as their spokesman, that's a good way to garner a lot more moderate voters. And I'm not joking at all. I know it sounds cynical and like a joke, but it's not. It's time for the non-leftist forces opposed to the current German consensus to start acting smart about politics. Also, MAGA hats, Make America Great Again hats everywhere. And even better, make your own hats with Make Germany Great Again. Start pushing back culturally on the entrenched left. Now, the universities in Germany are a lot less leftist than the ones in the United States or the United Kingdom, and you should use that to your advantage. Now, that's cold-hearted practical politics here. You have to get out there and start to agitprop. Change will not come by sitting at home and bitching in one's echo chamber. Now, if you can't do any of that yourself, support, including financially, those who can. Use social media to shill for these messages. If everyone does some of these to a certain extent, you can meme the establishment into oblivion, just like Trump was memed into presidency. Alright. Last example, the Netherlands. Now, Geert Wilders' Partij voor de Vrijheid, that would be the Party for Freedom, is supposed to gain seats this election. Latest poll that I've seen, conducted on November 13, has PVV at 29 seats, almost double than the 15 seats it currently has in the House of Representatives, whilst the ruling VVD is collapsing in virtually all polls. The same opinion poll from November 13 by the Peel company, VVD is credited to win 26 seats, down 15 from the 41% from the 41 seats that it currently holds. Also, the Labour Party is collapsing even harder, from 38 seats it currently holds to 10, and with some polls even showing that the Labour Party will be in the single digits coming this election in March. That's huge in and of itself. But there's also bad news. The Christian Democratic Appeal, which is basically a cucked party, is rising again, projected to increase its seats from 13 now to 16 or even 20, depending on the poll. The Green Left is also rising strongly, projected to quadruple its seats from only 4 right now to 16 come this election. This means there is a lot of hope for the cucked establishment to be able to still create a grand coalition to keep out the PVV. Now, PVV has its own share of nastiness. Geert Wilders' willingness to team up with Front National is in and of itself concerning, but in a parliamentary election, it's not just Geert Wilders' will that actually matters. If I were Dutch, I would do 2 things. One is, of course, to try to build inroads into the People's Party, that would be the ruling VVD, to subvert them to slide further to the right, and second, would absolutely push on smaller parties. And this is something that I haven't heard or read any Dutch pundit thinking about. So here's like this. One such party is the 50-plus party, the party of pensioners, which pollsters constantly credit to get 6 and up to 9 seats, up from only 1 right now, though they did earn 2 in the last election, but lost 1 due to a member crossing party lines, whatever. Now, this small party sounds weird to court by right-wingers, but think about it this way. It is a party of pensioners who tend to be more conservative, especially on social issues anyway, and that has its own special interests. That would be the pensions. The pitch to them should sound something like this. Look, with all of this unskilled labor sucking benefits and the economy strangled by regulation, who is going to work to pay into the pension fund to fund your pensions? That's why more economic freedom and sensible immigration reform is in your best interest. That's how I would pitch it. I would pitch the right-wing case to the 50-plus party. There's also PVDD, the Party for Animals, and this one should also be courting, pitching the message to emphasize the incredibly unsavory treatment of animals by Muslims. I know it sounds cynical, what I am saying, but, well, welcome to practical politics. The idea is to build a wide coalition of representatives that when push comes to shove, they would vote in the parliament in accordance to our ideas, even though they do it for different reasons. Alright, I think that's about it for now. I covered the countries that have a meaningful election soon, except for Romania, which I'll deal with personally and apply the ideas directly. In fact, some of them I'm already applying. But anyway, Romania, just like Hungary and Serbia, are kind of a special case. So yeah. With all of that being said, gee, it still got quite a long of a video. Well, I tried. So, with that said, thank you for watching. Thank you for your continuous and generous support. And I'll see you around on Freedom Alternative.